Hello, my friends. Indiana Holmes here again to continue story time. And we continue with the book, A Silent Witness. Tonight we begin with Chapter 6, A Council of War. I woke somewhat late on the following morning. Indeed, I was half but awake when there came a somewhat masterful and peremptory tap on my bedroom door, followed by the appearance in the room of a rather tall gentleman of some 30 years of age. I should have diagnosed him instantly as the doctor by his self-possessed, proprietary manner of entering, but he left me no time for guessing as to his identity. "Good morning, Jardine," he said briskly, jingling the keys and the small change in his trousers pockets. "My name is Jervis, second violin to Thorndyke Orchestra. I am in charge here pro tem. How are you feeling?" "Oh, I'm all right. I just have to get up and get going. You needn't trouble about the practice. I'm quite fit." "I'm glad to hear it," said Jervis. "But you'd better keep quiet all the same. My orders are explicit, and I know my place too well to disobey. Thorndyke's instructions were that you are not to make any visits or go abroad until after the inquest." "Inquest?" I exclaimed. "Yes. He's coming here at 4 o'clock to hold an inquiry into the circumstances that led to your being locked up in a cellar. And until then, I'm to look after the practice and keep an eye on you. What time do you expect the offspring of the Flittermouse?" "Who?" I demanded. "Bastion. He's coming back today, isn't he?" "Yes, about 6 o'clock tonight. Then you will be able to clear out. So much the better. The neighborhood doesn't seem to be very wholesome for you." "I suppose I can do surgery work," said I. "You'd better not. Better follow Thorndyke's instructions literally. But you can tell me about the patients and help me to dispense. And that reminds me that a person named Samway called just now, rather fine-looking woman, reminded me of a big, sleek tabby cat. She wouldn't say what she wanted. Do you know anything about her?" "I expect she came about her account, but she'll have to see Batson. I told her so, only a night or two ago." "Very well," said Jervis. "Then I'll be off now. And you take things easy, just for now. At least think over what happened last night so as to be ready for Thorndyke tomorrow." With this he bustled away, leaving me to rise for breakfast at my leisure. His advice to me was to think over the events of the previous night, which was rather superfluous. The experience was not one that I'll likely forget. To have escaped from death by the very slenderest of chance was in itself a matter to occupy one's thoughts pretty completely, apart from the horrible circumstances, and then there was the mystery in which the whole affair was enveloped, a mystery which utterly baffled my attempt to penetrate it. Turn it over as I would, and it was hardly out of my thoughts for a minute at a time all day. No glimmer of light could I perceive, not the faintest clue to any explanation of that hideous and incomprehensible crime. At 4 o'clock punctually, to the minute, Dr. Thorndyke arrived, and having quickly looked me over to see that I was none the worse for my adventure, proceeded to business. "Have you finished the visits, Jervis?" he asked. "Yes, and sent off all the medicine. There's nothing more to do until 6. Then," said Thorndyke, "we might have a cup of tea in the consulting room and talk about this affair over tea. Let's just think about it and see what we can come up with." "I'm rather taking possession of you, Jardine," he added, "but I think we ought to see where we are completely clear, even if we decide finally to hand the case over to the police. Don't you agree with me?" "Certainly." I agreed, highly flattered by the interest he was taking in my affairs. "Naturally, I should like to get to the bottom of the mystery." "So should I," said he. At that end, I propose that you give us a completely circumstantial account of the whole of the affair. I have had a talk with your very intelligent maid, Maggie, and now I want to hear what happened after she left you." "I don't think I have much to tell you that you don't know," said I. "However, I will take up the story where Maggie left off, and I proceeded to describe the events in detail, which, as I have related them to the reader, Thorndyke listened to my story with profound attention, making an occasional memorandum, but not uttering a word until I had finished. Then, after a rapid glance through his memoranda, he said, "You spoke of a note that was handed to you. Have you got that note?" "I left it on the writing table, and it's probably there still." "Yes, here it is." I brought it over to the little table on which our tea was laid out and handed it to him, and he took it from me with the dainty carefulness of a photographer handling a wet plate. I noted mentally that the habit of delicate manipulation contracted in the laboratory makes itself evident in the most trifling of everyday actions. "I see," he remarked, turning the envelope over and scrutinizing it minutely, "that this is addressed to Dr. H. Jardine. It appears, then, that he knows your Christian name. Can you account for that?" "No, I can't. The only letter I have had here was addressed to Dr. Jardine, and I have signed no certificates or documents." He made a note of my answer, and drawing the missive from his envelope, read it through. "The handwriting," he remarked, "looks disguised rather than illiterate, and the diction is inconsistent. The blatantly incorrected adverb at the end does not agree with the rest of the phraseology and the correct punctuation. As to the signature, you may neglect that unless you are acquainted with anyone in these parts with the name Parker." "I am not," said I. "Very well. Then, if you will allow me to keep this note, I will file it for future reference. And now I will ask you a few questions about the adventure of yours, which is really a most astonishing and mysterious affair, even more mysterious, I may add, than it looks at first glance, but we shall come to that presently. At the moment, we are concerned with the crime itself, with a manifest attempt to murder you, and the circumstances that led up to it, and there are certain obvious questions that suggest themselves. The first is, can you give any explanation of this attempt on your life?" "No, I cannot," I replied. "It is a complete mystery to me. I can only suppose that the fellow was a homicidal lunatic." "A homicidal lunatic," said Thorndyke, "is the baffled investigator's last resource, but we had better not begin supposing at this stage. Let us keep strictly to the facts. You do not know anything that would explain this attack on you?" "No." "Then the next question is, had you any property of value on your possession?" "No. £5 would cover the value of everything I had about me, including the instruments." "Then that seems to exclude a robbery as a motive. The next question is, does any person stand to benefit considerably by your death? Have you any considerable expectations in the way of bequests, reversions, or succession to landed property or titles?" "No," I replied with a faint grin. "I shall come for 1,000 or 2 when my uncle dies, but I believe the London hospital is the alternative legatee, and I suppose we would hardly suspect the hospital governors of this little affair. Otherwise, the only other person who would benefit from my death would be the undertaker who has got the contract to plant me." Thorndyke nodded and made a note of my answer. "That," said he, "disposes of the principal motives for premeditated murder. There remains the question of personal enmity, not a common motive in this country. Have you, as far as you know, any enemy or enemies who might conceivably try to kill you?" "As far as I know, I have not an enemy in the world, or anyone even who would wish to do me a bad turn." "Then," said Thorndyke, "that seems to dispose of all the ordinary motives for murder, and I may say that I have only put these questions as a matter of routine precaution, ex abundatae catulae, as Jervis says, when he is in a forensic mood, because certain other facts which have been learned seem to exclude any of these motives, except perhaps robbery from the person." "You haven't been long picking up those other facts," said Jervis. "Why, the affair only happened last night. I have only made a few simple inquiries," replied Thorndyke. "This morning I called upon Dr. Highfield, whose name as solicitor and agent to the landlords. I copied the notice on the gate at the works last night. He knows me slightly, so I was able to get from him the information that I wanted. It amounts to this. About 4 months ago, a Mr. Gill wrote him and offered a lump sum for the use of the mineral water works for 6 months. Highfield accepted the offer and drew up an agreement, as desired, granting Gill immediate possession of the premises and a small stock and plant, of which the residue was to be taken at a valuation by the landlords at the expiration of the term. I noted Gill's address as it appeared on the agreement and sent my man, Polton, to make inquiries. The address is that of West Kensington Lodging House, at which Gill was staying when he signed the agreement. He had been there only 3 weeks. He had left 2 days after the date of the agreement, and the landlady does not know where he went or anything about him. Sounds fishy, Jervis said, remarked. Did he tell Highfield what he wanted with the premises for? I understand that something was said about some assay work in connection with certain or rather uncertain mineral concessions, but of course that was no affair of Highfield's. His business was to get the rent, and having got it, his interest in Mr. Gill lapsed. But you see the bearing of these facts. Gill's connection with these works does, as Jervis says, look a little bit queer, especially after what happened. But seeing that he made his arrangements 4 months ago, at a time when Jardine had no thought of coming into this neighborhood, is clear that those arrangements could have no connection with this particular attempt. Gill obviously did not take those works with the intention of murdering Jardine. He took them for some other purpose, quite possibly the purpose that he started. And we must not assume that Gill was the perpetrator of this outrage at all. Could you identify the man who let you in? No, I replied, certainly not. I hardly saw him at all. The place was pitch dark, and whenever he struck a match, he was either behind me or in front of me, with his back to me. The only thing I could make out about him was that he had some sort of coarse wash leather gloves. Ah, exclaimed Thorndyke. Then we were right, Jervis. I looked in surprise from one to the other of my friends, and was on the point of asking Thorndyke what he meant when he continued. That closes another track. If you couldn't identify the man, a description of Gill, if we couldn't obtain it, would not help us. We must begin at some other point. It seems to me, said Jervis, that we haven't much to go upon at all. We haven't much, agreed Thorndyke, but we still have something. We find that the motive of this attempt was apparently not robbery, nor the diversion of an inheritable property, nor personal attempt or personal enmity on that attempt. It must have been premeditated, but yet it could not have been planned more than a week in advance, for Jardine has only been in this neighborhood for that time, and his coming was unexpected. The appearances very strongly suggest the motive, whatever it was, has been generated recently and probably locally, so we had better make a start from that assumption. It is possible, Jervis suggested, that this man Gill may be some sort of anarchist, crank, or something of the sort. Maybe just a thug. It is actually conceivable that he may have taken these premises for express purpose of having a secure place where he could perpetrate murders and conceal the bodies. It is quite conceivable, Thorndyke, and when we go and we look over the works, which I propose we do presently, we may as well bear the possibility in mind. But it is merely a speculative suggestion. To return to your affairs, Jardine, has your stay here been quite uneventful? Perfectly, I replied. No unusual or obscure cases, no injuries, nothing out of the common, I replied. No deaths, nothing. One, but the man died before I took over. Nothing unusual about that, everything quite regular. Oh, perfectly, I answered. And then, with a sudden qualm, as I recalled Bastian uncertainty as to the actual cause of the death, I added, at least I hope so. You hope so? Queried Thorndyke. Yes, because it's too late to go to the question now. The man was cremated. At this singular silence fell. Both my friends seemed to stiffen in their chairs, and both looked at me silently but very attentively. Then Thorndyke asked, Did you have anything to do with that case? Yes, I replied. I went with Batson to examine the body. And are you perfectly satisfied that everything was as it should be? I was on the point of saying yes, and then suddenly there arose before my eyes the vision of Mrs. Samway looking at me over Bastion's shoulder with that strange, inscrutable expression. And again, I recalled her unexplained anger and then her sudden change of mood. It had impressed me uncomfortably at that time, and it impressed me uncomfortably now. I don't know that I am, now that I come to think of it. I don't know that I'm over it, I replied. Why not? Asked Thorndyke. Well, I said, a little hesitatingly, to begin with, I don't think that the cause of death was quite clear. Batson couldn't find anything definite when he attended the man, and I know that the patient's death came as quite a surprise. But surely, exclaimed Thorndyke, he took some measures to find out the cause of death. He didn't. He assumed that it was a case of fatty heart and certified it as morbus cordis, and a man named O'Connor confirmed his certificate after examining the body. After merely inspecting the exterior? Yes. My two friends looked at each other more significantly, and Thorndyke remarked with a disapproving shake of the head, and this is what all the elaborate precautions about to in practice, a case in which might have been one of the crudest and baldest poisonings gets passed with hardly a pretense of scrutiny, and so it will always be. Routine precautions against the unsuspected are no precautions at all. That is the danger of cremation. It restores to the prisoner the security that he has enjoyed in the old days when there were no such sciences as toxicology or organic chemistry, when it was impossible for him to be tripped up by the exhumation and analysis. You don't think it is likely that this was a case of poisoning, do you? I asked. I know nothing about the case, he replied, excepting that there was gross negligence in issuing the certificates. What do you think about it yourself, looking back at the case? Is there anything besides the uncertainty that strikes you as unsatisfactory? I hesitated, and again the figure of Mrs. Samway rose before me with that strange, baleful look in her eyes. Finally, I described the incident to my colleagues. Mrs. Samway, exclaimed Jervis. Is that the handsome Lucrezia Borgia lady with the mongoose eyes who called here this morning? By Jove, Jardine, are you giving me the creeps? I understand, said Thorndyke, that you are making as if you feel the dead man's pulse. Yes, there is no doubt, I suppose, that he really was dead. None whatever. He was cold as a fish, and besides, there was quite distinct rigor mortis. That seems conclusive enough, said Thorndyke, but he continued to gaze at his open notebook with a profoundly speculative, thoughtful expression. It certainly looks, said Jervis, as if Jardine had either seen something or had been about to see something that he was not wanted to see. And the question is, what that something could have been. Yes, I agreed gloomily. That is what I have just been asking myself. There might have been a wound or injury or some kind, or there might have been the marks of a hypodermic needle on the wrist. I wish I knew what she meant by looking at me that way. Well, said Jervis, we shall never know now. The grave gives up its secrets now and again, but the crematorium furnace never. Whether he died naturally or murdered, Mr. Maddock is now a little heap of ashes with no message for anyone this side of the day of judgment. Thorndyke looked up. That seems to be so, said he, and really we have no substantial reasons to think that there was anything wrong. So we come back to your own affairs, Jardine, and the question is, what will you prefer to do? In what respect? I asked. In regard to this attempt on your life. You have told us that you have not an enemy in the world, but it appears as if you had, and a very dangerous one too. Nor would you like to put the case into the hands of the police, or would you rather that we keep our counsel and looked into it ourselves? I should like you to decide that, said I. The reason that I ask, said Thorndyke, is this. The machinery of the police is adjusted to professional crime, burglary, coining, forgery, and so forth, and their methods are mostly based on information received. The professional crook is generally well known to the police, and, when wanted for any particular job, can be found without much difficulty, and the information necessary for his conviction obtained from the usual sources. But in the cases of obscure, non-professional crime, the police are at a disadvantage. The criminal is unknown to them. They are no confederates from whom they can get information. Consequently, they have no starting point for their inquiries. They can't create clues, and they are very naturally will not devote time, labor, money, and cases to which they have nothing to go on. Now, this affair of yours does not look like a professional crime. No motive is evident, and you can give no information that would help the police. I doubt if they would do much more than give you some rather disagreeable publicity, and they might even suspect you of some kind of imposture. Gad, I exclaimed. That's just what they would do. It's what they did last time, and this affair would write me down, in their eyes, a confirmed mystery monger. Last time? Queried Thorndyke. What was last time? What was that all about? Have there been any other attempts? Not on me, I replied, but I had an adventure one night about 6 or 7 weeks ago that was made at Hampstead that has made the Hampstead police look on me, I think with some suspicion. And here I give my two friends a description of my encounter with the dead or insensible cleric in Millfield Lane and my discoveries on the following morning. But my dear Jardine, Thorndyke exclaimed, when I had finished, what an extraordinary man you are. It seems as if you could hardly show your nose out of doors without becoming involved in some dark and dreadful mystery. Well, said I hope to have now exhausted my gifts in that respect. I am not thirsting for more experiences. But what do you think about the Hampstead affair? Do you think I could have possibly have been mistaken? Could the man have been merely insensible after all, as the police suggested? Thorndyke shook his head. I don't think so. He replied, that it is possible to take that view. You see, the man had disappeared. Now, he could not have gotten away unassisted. In fact, he could not have walked away at all. One would have to assume that some persons appeared directly after you left, carried him away, and that appeared to have retired so quickly as not to have been overtaken by you, or on your return a few minutes later, with the police. That is assuming too much. And then there are the traces which you discovered the following day, which seem to suggest strongly that a body had been carried away to Kenwood. It is 1,000 pities that you encountered that keeper. If you could have followed the tracks while they were fresh, you might have been able to ascertain whither it had been carried. But now, to return to your latest experience, what shall we do? Shall we communicate with the police, or shall we make a few investigations of our own? As far as I'm concerned, I replied eagerly, a private investigation would be greatly preferable, but wouldn't it take up a rather lot of your time? Now, Jardine, you needn't apologize, said Jervis. Unless I am much mistaken, my respected senior has struck soundings, as the nautical phrase has it. He has a theory of your case, and he would like to see it through. Isn't that so, Thorndyke? Well, Thorndyke admitted, I will confess that the case piques my curiosity somewhat. It is an unusual affair, and suggests some curious hypothesis, which might be worth testing. So if you agree, Jardine, that we make at least a few preliminary investigations, I suggest that as soon as Baston returns, we three go over to what the newspapers would call the scene of the tragedy and reconstitute the affair on the spot. And what about Batson? I asked. Shall we tell him anything? I think we must, said Thorndyke, if only to put him on his guard, for your known enemy may be his enemy too. At this moment the street door banged loudly. A quick step danced along the hall, and Batson himself burst into the room. Good Lord! He exclaimed, halting abruptly at the door and gazing in dismay at our little council. What's the matter? Anything happened? Thorndyke laughed as if he shook his hand on the quadrum pupil. Come, come, Batson, said he. Don't make me out to such a bird of ill omen. I was afraid of something awkward might happen that have occurred, and a police job or inquest or something of that sort would be required. You weren't so very wrong, said Thorndyke. When you are at liberty, I'll tell you about it. I am at liberty now, said Batson, dropping into his chair and glaring at Thorndyke through his spectacles. No scandal, I hope. Thorndyke reassured him on this point and gave him a brief account of my adventure and a proposed visit to the works, to which he listened with occasional ejaculations of astonishment and relief. By gum! He exclaimed. What a mercy you got there in time. If you hadn't, there'd have been an inquest and a devil of a fuss. I should never have heard the last of it. Ruined the practice and worried me into a lunatic asylum. Oh, and about the works. I wouldn't go there if I were you. Why not? Thorndyke asked. Well, you may have to answer some awkward questions, and we don't want this affair to get about. You know, no use in raising a dust rumpus of any kind plays the deuce with a medical practice. Thorndyke smiled at my principal's frank egotism. Jervis and I went over last night, said he, and had a hasty look round, and we found the place quite deserted. Probably it is so still. Then you won't be able to get in. How'd you get in last night? I happened to have a piece of stiff wire in my pocket, Thorndyke replied passively. Ha! Said Batson. Wire, eh? Pick lock, in fact. I wouldn't if I were you. Devil of a robbery if anyone sees you. Hello! There goes the bell. Patient, let him wait. 'Tisn't till 6 yet, is it? 2 minutes past, replied Thorndyke, rising and looking at his watch. Perhaps we'd better be starting, as it is now dark, and the business at the works, if there is any, is probably over for the day. Hang the works, exclaimed Batson. I wouldn't go nosing about there. What's the good? Jardine's all right, and the chappie isn't likely to be on view. You'll only raise a stink for nothing, and bring in a crowd of beastly reporters humming about the place. There's that damn bell again. Well, if you won't go say, perhaps you'll look at me some other way, some other time. Always delighted to see you, Jervis. You're not going, Jardine. I've got to set up with you and hear your report. I'll look in later, said I, when you've finished the evening's work. Right you are, said Bastian, opening the door and adroitly edging his way out. Sorry you can't stay. Good night. Good night. He shepherded us persuasively and compellingly down the hall with a skill born of long practice, with glorious patience, and having exchanged us on the doorstep for a stout woman with 2 children, returned to the house with his prey and was lost sight of. A Silent Witness, Chapter 7, An Unseen Enemy. From my late principal's house, we walked away quickly down the lamplit street, all, I think, dimly amused at the circumstances of our departure. Is Batson always like that? Thorndyke asked. Always, I replied. Hurry and bustle are his normal states. Dear, dear, commented Thorndyke. What a terrible amount of time he must waste. Of course, one can understand now how that cremation muddle came about. Your incurable hustler is always thinking of things he's got to do next instead of the thing that he's doing at the moment. By the way, Jardine, I am taking it for granted that you would like to inspect these premises. It is not essential. Jervis and I had a preliminary look around last night, and I dare say we picked up most of the facts that are likely to be of importance if we should be going farther into the matter. I think it would be as well for me to take a look at the place and show you exactly where and how the affair happened. I think so too, said Thorndyke. It was all pretty evident, but you might be able to show us something that we overlooked. Here we are. I wonder if Mr. Gill is on the premises, supposing him still to frequent them. He looked up and down the street and, taking a key from his pocket, inserted it into the lock. Why, how on earth did you get the key? I asked. Thorndyke looked at me slyly. We keep a tame mechanic, said he, as he turned the key and opened the wicket. Yes, but how did he get the pattern of the lock? I asked. Thorndyke laughed softly. It is only a simple trade lock. The fact is, Jardine, that in our branch of practice, we have occasionally to take on some rather irregular proceedings. For instance, I usually carry a small set of pick locks, fortunately for you. That is how I got in last night. Then I never go abroad without a little box of molding wax, a most invaluable material, Jardine, for collecting certain kinds of evidence. Well, with a slip of the wood and a bit of wax, I was able to furnish my man with the necessary data for filling up a blank key. One doesn't want to be seen using a picklock. Now, can you show us the way? He flashed a pocket electric lamp on the ground, and we advanced over the rough cobbles until we reached the door at the side. This is where I went in, said I. It opens into a sort of corridor, and at the end is a door opening some steps that lead down to a passage below. Thorndyke tried the handle of the door and pushed it, but it was evidently locked or bolted. I left this door unlocked last night, said he, so it is clear that someone has been here since. I hardly expected that. I thought our friend would have cleared off for good, but it is possible that Gill had nothing to do with the attempt. The premises may have been used by someone who happened to know that they were unoccupied. It would have been quite easy for such a person to gain admittance, as you see. While speaking, he had produced from his pocket a little bunch of skeleton keys, with one of which he has now quietly unlocked the door. These builder's locks, said he, are merely symbolic of security. You are not expected to unfasten them without authority, but you can if you look like it happens to have a bit of a stiff wire about you. We entered the corridor, and as we proceeded, looked into the rooms that opened out of it. One of them was meagerly furnished as an office, but the thick layer of dust on the desk and the stools showed clearly that it had been long disused. The other rooms were empty and desolate, and showed no trace of use or occupation. The worthy Gill, said Jervis, seems to have been able, like Diogenes, to get on with a very modest outfit. Yes, agreed Thorndyke. It is a little difficult to guess what his occupation is. The place looks as if it's never been used at all. Shall I go first? He halted for a moment, passing the light of his lamp over the massive door at the head of the steps, and then began to descend. It was certainly a horrible and repulsive place, especially to my eyes, with the recollection of my late experience fresh in mind. The rough brick walls, covered with the crumbling remains of an old whitewash, the black masses of cobwebs that drooped like funeral stalactites from the ceiling, the fungi that sprouted in the corners, and the snail tracks that glistened in the lamplight on the stone floor, all contributed to a vault-like sepulchral effect that was most unpleasantly suggestive of what might have been and very nearly had been. My late prison was easily distinguished by two holes in the door. We looked in, but the cellar was completely empty, save for a few chips of wood and a pinch of of sawdust, memorials of my sojourn in the lethal chamber, at which I could hardly look without a shudder. Then we passed on to the next cellar, the one adjoining my prison, and in this the object of no little curiosity to me. Here, while I was securely bolted into my cell, that unknown villain had deliberately and in cold blood made all the arrangements for my murder, arrangements which he little suspected that I should survive to look upon. Thorndyke, too, was interested. He stood at the open door, looking in as if considering the positions of various objects, as in fact he was. Someone has been here since last night, Jervis said. Yes, agreed Jervis. That gas bottle has been taken down from the opening. You see, Jardine, he continued, he had stood that big packing case up on the end and laid the gas bottle along the top, with its nozzles just opposite the hole. 2 other bottles were standing upright with their nozzles upwards. I understand, said Thorndyke, that you had heard 3 bottles only turned on. Yes, I answered. There was the one opposite the hole and the 2 others. I ask, Thorndyke said, because there are, as you see, 7 other bottles lying by the wall. Those are all empty. We tried them when we came in here last night. I know nothing about those others, said I. The 3 bottles that I have mentioned I heard distinctly, and after he had turned on the 3rd, the man went out of the cellar and closed up the door. Then, said Thorndyke, the other 7 bottles were presumably used for some other, and let us hope, more legitimate purpose. I wonder why our friend has been at the trouble of moving the cylinders. Perhaps, suggested Jervis, he thought that the arrangement might be a little too illuminating for the police, if they should happen to pay a visit to the place. He may not be aware that the apparatus had already been inspected in situ by us, or again, the cylinders may have been moved by someone else. We are assuming that he is a lawful occupant of the premises, but he may be a mere secret intruder like ourselves, who has discovered that the place is more or less unoccupied and has made the use of the premises and the plant for his own benevolent purposes. Yes, agreed Thorndyke. That is perfectly true, but we can put the matter to a test, at least negatively. If the cylinders have been moved by an innocent stranger, they will bear the prints of hands. But why shouldn't the man himself leave prints of his hands on the cylinders, I asked. Because, my dear Jardine, he is too knowing a bird. Jervis and I went carefully over to the cylinders last night in the hope of getting a few fingerprints to submit to Scotland Yard, but not a vestige could we find. Our friend had seen to that. We assumed that he had operated in gloves, and your description of him confirmed our assumption, which, in its way, is an interesting fact, for a man who is knowing enough to take these precautions has probably had some previous experience of crime, or at least has some acquaintance with the ways of criminals. The suggestion, in fact, is that, although this is an ordinary professional crime, the perpetrator may be a professional criminal. And further suggestion is, of course, that the very deliberate premeditation may have occurred. While he had been speaking, he had produced from his pocket a small flattened bottle, fitted with a metal cap and filled with a yellowish powder. Removing the cap and uncovering the perforated inner cap, like that of an idioform dredger, he proceeded to take a cloud of the light powder over the 3 upper cylinders, jarring them with his foot to make the powder spread. Then he blew sharply on them, one after the other. When the powder disappeared from their surfaces, leaving visible 1 or 2 shapeless whitened smears, but never a trace of a fingerprint or even the shape of a hand, Thorndyke rose and slipped the bottle back into his pocket. Apparently, said he, the cylinders were moved by our unknown friend, with the same careful precautions as on the first occasion. A wary gentleman, this Jervis. He'll give us a run for our money at any rate. Yes, agreed Jervis. He doesn't mean to give himself away. He preserves his incognito most punctuously. I'll say that for him. And meanwhile, said Thorndyke, we had better proceed with our measures for drawing him out of the modest retirement. I want you, Jardine, to look round the cellar and tell us if anything that you see in it reminds you of anything that has happened to you, or suggests any thought or reflection." I looked around, I am afraid rather vacantly. A more unsuggestive collection of objects I have never looked upon. "There are gas cylinders," I said feebly, "but I have told you about them. I don't see anything else excepting a few odd bits of rubbish." "Then take a good look at the rubbish," said he. "Remember that it may be necessary at some future time for you to recall exactly what the cellar was like and what it contained. You may even have to make a sworn statement. So cast your eye around the room and tell us what you see." I did so, wondering inwardly what the deuce I was expected to see, and what might be the importance of my seeing it. "I see," said I, "a moldy-looking cellar, about 15 feet by 12, with a very bad brick walls, a plaster ceiling in an advanced state of decay, and a concrete floor. In the left hand of the wall is a hole about 6 inches square, opening into an adjoining cellar. The contents are 10 gas cylinders, all apparently empty. A key or spanner, which seems to have been used to turn the cocks. A large packing case, which, to judge by its shape, seems to have contained gas cylinders." "The word 'large,'" interrupted Thorndyke, "is not a particularly exact one." "Well, then, a packing case about 7 feet long by 2.5 feet wide and deep." "That's better," said Thorndyke. "Always give your dimensions in quantitative terms, if possible. Go on." "There are a couple of waterproof sheets," said I. "I don't see quite what they can have been used for." "Never mind their use," said Thorndyke. "Note the fact that they are here." "I have," said I, "and that seems to complete the list. With the exception of the straw in which I suppose the gas cylinders were packed, there is a large quantity of that, but not more than would seem necessary for the purpose. And that seems to complete the inventory, and I may say that none of these things conveys any suggestion whatever to my mind." "Probably not," said Thorndyke, "and it is quite possible that none of these things has any particular significance at all. But as they are the only facts offered us, we must make the best of them. There is one other cellar that we have not yet looked into, I think." We came out, and, walking along the passage, came to another door, which stood slightly ajar. Thorndyke opened it, and, throwing in the light of his lamp, revealed a considerable stack of long iron gas bottles, and 1 or 2 packing cases, similar to the ones I had already seen. "I presume," said he, "that these are full cylinders, the store from which our friend got his supply, but we may as well make sure." He ran back to the adjoining cellar and returned with the spanner, with which he proceeded to turn the cock of one of the topmost cylinders, which a loud hiss and a thin snowy cloud showed that his surmise was correct. He had just closed the cock and stepped out into the passage to take back the spanner when I saw him suddenly stop, as if listening, and then he sniffed once or twice. "What is it?" asked Jervis. But Thorndyke, without replying, ran quickly along the passage and up the steps, and I heard him trying the door at the top. "Bring up one of the empty cylinders," he said quietly. "They have bolted us in, apparently set fire to the place." We did not inquire much, urging to act quickly. Picking up one of the long, ponderous iron cylinders, we ran with it along the passage towards the light of Thorndyke's lamp. As we descended the steps and became plainly aware of the smell of the burning wood and the crackling sound, faintly audible through the massive door. "There is only one bolt," said Thorndyke. "I noticed it as we came in. I will throw my light on that part of the door where it is fixed, and you two must batter on that spot with the cylinder." The door was, as I have said, a massive one, but it would have been a massive door indeed that could have withstood the blows of that ponderous iron cylinder. Wielded by 2 strong men whose lives depended on their efforts, at the very first crash of the battering ram, a tiny chink opened at the each of the thundering blows. The building shook. Furiously, we pounded at the thick plank-built door, and slowly the chink widened as the screws of the bolt tore out of the woodwork. And as the last chink opened, a thin reek of pungent smoke filtered in, and the cold light of Thorndyke's lantern became contrasted with a red glare from without. And then suddenly the door under the heavy battering burst from its fastenings and swung wide open. A blinding, choking cloud of smoke and sparks rolled in upon us, through which we could see in the corridor outside a pile of straw and crates and broken packing cases, blazing and cracking furiously. It looked as if we were cut off beyond all hope. Jervis and I had dropped the now useless cylinder and were gazing in horror at the blazing mass that filled the corridor, and cut off from our only means of escape when we were recalled by the voice of Thorndyke speaking in his usual quiet and precise manner. "We must get the full cylinders up as quickly as possible," said he, and running down the steps, he made straight for the cellar, whither we followed him. Picking up one of the cylinders, we carried it quickly to the top of the steps. "Lay it down," said Thorndyke, "and fetch another." Jervis and I ran back to the cellar, and taking the cylinder up, brought it along the passage. As we were ascending the steps, there suddenly arose a loud, penetrating hiss, and as we reached the top, we saw Thorndyke disengaging the spanner from the cock of the cylinder, out of which the jet of liquid was issuing, mingled with a dense, snowy cloud. An instantaneous glance, as we laid down the fresh cylinder, reassured me very considerably. The icy volatile liquid and the falling cloud of intensely cold carbonic acid snow had produced an immediate effect, as was evident in a blackened, smoldering patch in the midst of the blazing mass. With reviving hope, I followed Jervis once more down the steps and along the passage at the end of the cellar, from which we brought a fourth and a third cylinder. By this time, the passage was filled with smoke, so filled that it was difficult for either of us to see or to breathe, and the bright light that had first poured in through the open doorway had already pulled down so far that Thorndyke's figure, framed in the opening, loomed dim and shadowy amidst the smoke and against the dusky red background. We found him, when we reached the top of the steps, holding the great gas bottle and directing the stream of the snow and the liquid onto those parts of the wood and straw from which flames still issued. "It will be all right," he said in his calm, unemotional way. "The fire had not really got off to an effective start. The straw made a great show, but that is nearly all burnt now, and all this carbonic acid gas will soon smother the burning wood. But we must be careful that it doesn't smother us too. The steps will be the safest place for us at present." He opened the cock of the new cylinder, and having placed it so that it played on the most refractory part of the burning mass, backed to the steps where Jervis and I stood, looking through the doorway. The fire was, as he had said, rapidly dying down. The volumes of the gas produced by the evaporation of the liquid and the melting snow cut off the supply of air, so that, in place of the flames that had at first looked so alarming, only a dense reek of smoke arose. "Now," said Thorndyke, after we had waited on the steps for a couple of minutes more, "I think we might make a sortie and put an end to it. If we can get the smoldering stuff off that wooden floor down onto the stone, the danger will be over." He led the way cautiously into the corridor, and once more, bringing his electric lamp into the requisition, began to kick the smoldering cases and crates and the blackened masses of straw down the steps onto the stone floor of the passage, whither we followed them and scattered them with our feet until they were completely safe from any chance of reignition. "There," said Jervis, giving a final kick at a small heap of smoking straw. "I should think that ought to do it. There's no fear of that stuff lighting up again, and, if I may venture to make the remark, the sooner we are off these premises, the happier I shall be. Our friend's methods of entertaining his visitors are a trifle too strenuous for my taste. He might try to dynamite next. Yes, I agreed. Or he might take pot shots at us with a revolver from some dark corner. It is much more likely, said Thorndyke, that he has cleared off in anticipation of the alarm of the fire. Still, it is undeniable that we shall be safer outside. Shall I go first and show you a light? He piloted us along the corridor and up the cobbled yard, putting away his lamp as he unlocked the wicket. There was no sign of anyone about the premises, nor, when he had passed out the gate, was there anyone in sight in the street. I looked about, expecting to see some sign of the fire, but there was no smoke visible, and only a slight smell of burning wood. The smoke must have drifted out the back. Well, Thorndyke remarked, it has been quite an exciting little episode, and a highly satisfactory finish, as things turned out, though it might have easily been a very much of the reverse. But for the fortunate chance of those gas bottles being available, I don't think we should be alive at this moment. No, agreed Jervis. We should be in much the same condition by this time as Batson's late patient, Mr. Maddock, or at least well on our way to that disembodied state. However, all's well that ends well. Are you coming our way, Jardine? I will walk a little with you, said I. Then I must go back to Batson to settle up and fetch my traps. I walked with him to Oxford Street, and we discussed our late adventure as we went. It was a pretty strong hint to clear out, wasn't it? Jervis remarked. Yes, replied Thorndyke. It didn't leave us much option, but the affair can't be left at this. I shall have a watch set on the premises, and I shall make some more particular inquiries about Mr. Gill. By the way, Jardine, I haven't your address. I'd better have it in case I want to communicate with you. And you'd better have my card in case anything turns up, which you think I ought to know. We accordingly exchanged cards, and as we had now reached the corner of Oxford Street, I wished my friends adieu, and thoughtfully retraced my steps to Jacob Street. And that, my friends, is the end of chapter 7. Well, 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 whoever this mysterious person is, they are quite cunning, quite violent, and yet not very successful in achieving their ends yet. The means to their ends are kind of diabolical, but the ends to their means have not yet succeeded. So, until tomorrow night, this has been Indiana Holmes. Love to you all. Good night.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.